Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners. If you haven't watched these lives before, then I'm really glad that you're here. And if you're always here when we do the lives, I'm happy to see you again. So my starter is healthy, active, bubbly, ready to mix. So I'm going to do a single loaf beer bread recipe. So you can use any beer you like. Any beer works. And basically all we're doing is substituting beer instead of water for our beginner bread recipe. So first and foremost, I'm going to do the level 2 hydration beginner bread recipe. So that is 200 grams of starter, 1,000 grams of flour, 700 grams of water, and 20 grams of salt. But I'm going to cut it in half today just to make a single loaf. Excuse me. We have a terrible cold. So I'm going to start with 100 grams of starter and get that into the bowl. Straight out of my starter jar into my mixing bowl. Excuse me. Really bad cold in the house this week. So there's a guy in the big Facebook group, my big group that... So this is the Facebook page that we're on right now. This is where I get all of our tutorials posted. This is where we sort of share all the resources that we've created for group members. And then there's the big group, which is a forum where everybody can paste. And in that group, we have a member. His name's Bill. And he makes stunningly, stunningly beautiful loaves. I mean, his scoring, it's just so perfect. And whenever he posts, people go nuts. And so he often posts like little pieces of advice within his photos. And I was reading one of them the other day, and he said something very interesting about keeping all of his hydration in the dough. So I spent the last few days doing just the slightly different things that he does from what I do. And sure enough, I'm getting really excellent loaves. So normally what I do is I mix in my big mixing bowl, get the dough put together, stretch and fold it over 2 hours in the big mixing bowl. And then after that, I separate my dough and I put them in these clear straight-sided containers. This is my bulk proofing method that I think helps everybody who's trying to understand how much their dough has risen. That's where you take your dough and put it in a clear straight-sided container, mark its height, and then you can watch it rise. So you're a lot more confident that it's gone to 75% or 100%, whatever it may be. Now, when my mix is in that bowl, I've just been throwing a towel over top of it just to keep the air away from it. But what Bill said is, he actually mixes right in his plastic containers, and between every stretch and fold, between every rest, he keeps the lid on tight. And what he thinks is that that's retaining moisture. And it makes sense, right? He also says never put a towel on top of your bowl because it's actually sucking moisture out, which is an interesting concept that I had never heard before, but also very much makes sense. So today I'm just going to mix right in my bulk proofing container. So to pick up, we had 100 grams of starter, and now we are going to add 350 grams of beer. So here we go. We're just going to pour it in just like it was the water. And like I said, you can use any beer. I think this would be beautiful with like a Guinness or, but this is a nice light beer. We find with the Bud Light, we can't taste it at all in the bread. It just makes the bread like super moist, and I don't even know how to explain it. It just tastes delicious. I don't make beer bread that often, but I was just cleaning out the fridge this morning and saw that one can sitting there and thought, hey, why not get this done? So just like the same way we always do it, I'm going to dissolve my starter into my beer, get it all sort of good in there. And then once it's fully dissolved and nice and foamy, I'm going to add my flour. Today I'm going to do about 100 grams of whole wheat and 400 grams of regular all-purpose flour. So how's that looking? Looks pretty good. Looks pretty dissolved. I guess that's another neat thing about mixing in these clear containers is you can actually see all around what's happening in your dough, not just in that one spot. So here we go. All right. So I'm going to now add a total of 500 grams of flour. I'm going to go with about 100 grams of whole wheat. There we go. And then this regular all-purpose flour. If any of you guys have any questions as we go, feel free to ask them. I see them popping up in the video when they come in. All right, so 400 grams of flour, of all-purpose flour. All right, and then 10 grams of salt right on top. So normally what I do with my big bowl is I start stirring it up with my spoon first. I'll just turn this down a little bit so that you can see it a little better. I start stirring up with my spoon first until most of the flour is absorbed by the water. And then I finish mixing it with my hands. So right off the bat, as I'm doing this, I'm thinking to myself, well, it feels kind of tough to mix it in this small bowl without it spilling at the top. So a big mixing bowl is nice for that, for the room to get your dough mixed really well. But it's actually not entirely bad in this container because I can see all the way around the dough and what's happening with it. So Bill in his post said that he operates with a 69.8% hydration. Our level 2 hydration beginner bread recipe is 70%. It's 700 grams of water per 1,000 grams of flour. And our beginner bread recipe is 68%, so 680 grams per 1,000 grams of flour. So it's not a huge difference in water between the beginner bread recipe and the level 2 hydration recipe, but there is a difference in the amount of starter that we're using. So we're increasing the starter from 120 grams in the beginner bread recipe to 200 grams in the level 2 hydration. So that starters are going to affect hydration as well, right? Some people like to say they're 50-50 flour and water, and so it doesn't have any effect. But the reality is that they're a third flour, a third water, and a third starter, right? And starter, as it ferments, becomes liquid. It eats through the flour, and the longer you leave it, the more, the closer it gets to being alcohol, which would be considered a liquid, right? So I think that the starter affects the hydration as well. So hey, I'm not actually disliking mixing it directly in my bulk proofing container. I think my only concern would be that these plastic containers might break. The metal bowls are a little sturdier, but going by Bill's philosophy that we're trying to keep all of the moisture that we have in the bread, I think this is an awesome idea. So I've got this mixed up to a shaggy dough. I'll show it to you. It's quite sticky right now, but that's okay. The stickiness goes away as we stretch and fold. Last time I did this, well, every time I've done this beer bread, so here it is. I have found that with the same amount of water and flour as the beginner bread recipe, it feels like it gains strength faster. When I was mixing the beer bread recipe, you know, I always say that you should do 4 sets of stretches and folds, right? 30 minutes rest in between, 4 sets of stretch and folds. That'll build enough strength for your bread, and then start the bulk proofing process. So that means that from the time you start mixing until the time you're done your stretching and folding, it's about 2 hours and 5 or 10 minutes, however long it takes to mix up the dough. And then your bulk proofing time is somewhere between 3 and 10 hours, usually more like 5 to 7 is average, right? But I do find with the beer bread, and I don't know why it is, but with the beer bread, I find that it seems to build strength faster. And I don't know if it's because the beer is activating the starter differently or what it could be. So with this beer bread, I might only stretch and fold it 3 times. I can already feel, even when I'm mixing it with my hands, that it gains strength faster. So I'm just going to quickly refeed the starter. I bake every 2 or 3 days. So the way I manage it is I feed my starter right after I bake. I let it rise on the counter. And then once it's peaked, I stick it in the fridge at peak. And if I bake within 2 or 3 days, my starter is usually still at peak in the fridge, so I can pull it straight out. So I'll show you. Like this one, right? My elastic slid up. But this one went into the fridge at peak. You can see it's still full of bubbles. It's got lots of good stuff happening in it. It's been in the fridge since yesterday. And I'll bake with that one tomorrow. So I've always got the two going. But there's lots of different ways to manage your starter. The easiest way to manage your starter is the one that matches your baking style the most. So if you're a daily baker, then it makes sense just to feed your starter right after you mix and leave it on the counter, and then it's ready for you at your next mix. If you're like me and you bake every 2 or 3 days, then the way I explained, where I feed it right after I'm done my mix, let it peak and then stick it in the fridge at peak, and it sort of stays at peak in the fridge until my next bake 2 or 3 days later. But if you only bake once a week, an easier way to manage your starter is to don't feed it after you are done your mix, and then just pull it out 4 to 12 hours before you're ready to bake with it, and feed it and leave it on the counter until you're good to go. The beginner bread recipe is set up so that you can feed your starter before bed and then mix early in the morning and bake your bread the same day. We often suggest that newbies skip cold proofing just until they master the essential basic processes, only because if you've really messed up in bulk proofing, then it's going to just be magnified in cold proofing, right? So cold proofing is an excellent process. We like it, but we're just saying those first few bakes for beginners, they might want to skip cold proofing. I often skip cold proofing because I need the bread. We just go through the bread so quickly. It's the only bread we eat. So I have to get my dough baked. I think this one today, I might bake it. I might cold proof it. I'm not really sure. So there we go. We've got the beer bread recipe mixed up. Now in the description of this video, the whole recipe's there, the beginner bread recipe's there, the essential processes are all there. Everything you need if you want to do this yourself is there. What I'm going to do with this is wait 30 minutes from the time it was mixed, stretch and fold it, do that 2, maybe 3 more times, and then let the dough rise in my bulk proofing containers. I find that takes about 5 hours. And then at that point, I'm going to pre-shape my dough, shape it, and either bake it or get it into my bannetons. So thanks to all of you for being here today. If you have any questions, then definitely let me know. I'm always happy to help, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.